The writer C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Literature adds to reality. It does not simply describe it. It enriches the necessary competencies that daily life requires and provides. And in this respect, it irrigates the deserts that our lives have already become." So today I'm going to talk to you guys about literary theory, what it is, how we use it, and why it matters. Now, unlike a lot of people, I've spent the last few years engaging in this work, trying to learn what literary theory is and how to use it. But like a lot of people, and like many of you, I've spent the entirety of my life in love with literature. And it's this love that has led me to this place where I want to investigate it further. I want to figure out the deeper meanings, the guts of it. And my hope by the end of this speech is that you will also have that curiosity and that want to figure out, okay, how do I analyze the book I'm reading? How do I see how it relates to the world outside of me and my own personal life? So what is literary theory? The most simple explanation for what literary theory is to think of it like a pair of glasses that we put on to interpret literature. Now, built into the lens of these glasses are ideas, assumptions, and questions. There are a number of different schools of theory, and from each school of theory, we have a different lens through which we take in literature. Now, let me give you some examples. There's feminist criticism that has its own lens. There's queer theory. There's Marxism. There's post-colonialism. There is critical race theory, post-structuralism, deconstruction, reader response, historic, a number of different ways that we can approach a text and analyze it for what its deeper meanings have to say and what they have to say in relevance to our school of theory. So we're going to use an example right now, and that example is the story of Goldilocks. Before we approach a text through a feminist lens, it's important that we first understand the ideas and assumptions that make up that lens. Now, when it comes to feminist literary theory, a very simplified explanation for what it stands for is that it is the belief that women are deserving of equality and women are deserving of respect. So, a feminist literary critic would approach a text with that in their lens, and they would also have a number of questions about it, such as, how are women treated by their characters in the story? How are women presented in the story? Do characters switch traits of different genders? And what do the actions of the female characters say not only about that character, but about women in general? They would, in addition to this, look at the historical context of when the story was written and perhaps maybe even authorial intent. So many of you have read the story of Goldilocks, and for sake of time, I'm not going to read through the entire story here. I'll put the text right here on the screen if you want to read it. But the gist of it is, a girl gets lost in the woods, finds a cabin, goes inside, eats porridge that's just right for her, finds a chair that's just right for her, and goes to bed in one that's just right for her. Unbeknownst to her, the cabin is owned by bears. When the bears come home, they wake her up. She runs out of the house screaming her head off. So let's go back to how a feminist literary critic might question this text. What are some of the questions? Look at a couple of them. How is she presented? Well, she's presented by her name, her looks, and the fact that she's alone. What actions does she take that are indicative not only of who she is, but by extension, women in general? Well, she breaks into a house. She's incredibly picky. At one point, she whines when she sits on the wrong chair. And when confronted by the bears, she runs away from the conflict, screaming her head off. Now, a feminist literary critic would take all of these things into account and realize that the portrayal of Goldilocks is one of a silly girl. It's a very negative image of a woman. And they would also take into account the historical context of this story, which is said to be sourced back to the 19th century. And that is that single women were viewed as dangerous to the nuclear family. And so in this story, you have a single woman wandering through the forest, breaking into the home of a nuclear bear family, and raiding their house for all they have. Now, these would spark larger conversations within feminism that would be really exciting and would speak to not only our history, but where do some of these beliefs persist in our culture, and would make for an interesting conversation. So that's just one example. And there are numerous, much more thorough ways you can investigate literary theory, and if we had far more time, we would do that. But now I want to get to why this stuff is important. When we read, we are taking part in something that's very active. What we read impacts us. So certain beliefs, certain ideologies, certain assumptions, we digest them, and we bring those out with us into the world. It's also important because a lot of literature speaks to some underlying systems and ways that our world runs. And one of the fun ways that we can question those systems, question the status quo, is by looking to literature and seeing how it plays around with that, and developing a better understanding of humanity and why it does what it does, and a better understanding of the world and why it is the way it is. So if we are going to take literature to be this incredibly rich resource, I think we need to take it seriously. I think we need to put on these lenses and see what deeper meanings we can tease out from it, and figure out ways to apply that to the world. Now, going back to my C.S. Lewis quote, this is one way that we can irrigate the desert areas within us, by placing scrutiny onto the literature we love, and engaging not only in this solitary activity, but taking our insights and bringing them out into the world at large.